1943. 27,000 feet above Rouen, France. Frost crept along the curved canopy of Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson's Republic P-47 Thunderbolt as the distant sunlight shimmered off his polished wings. Below him, the patchwork of occupied France stretched endlessly: green fields, gray roads, and the dark scars of bomb craters. His squadron, the 61st Fighter Squadron of the 56th Fighter Group, flew tight formation around the lumbering B-17 bombers bound for the Renault factory near Paris. The intercom crackled. "Bandits. 10 o'clock high? Focke-Wulfs." Johnson's gloved hand clenched the control column. He had heard stories about the Luftwaffe's lethal FW-190s, about the P-47's weight, its sluggish climb, its thirst for fuel. The Germans called it Die Fliegen Milchflasch, the flying milk bottle. Even among American pilots, the Thunderbolt's bulky shape drew smirks. It was no Mustang, no Spitfire, just a brute. Then, silver flashes streaked through the formation. A burst of 20mm cannon shells ripped through the air, tearing into the leading bomber's right wing. Fire. Smoke. Men bailing out into the thin, freezing air. Johnson felt his stomach twist. The call came again. "Thunderbolts, brake left." He slammed the throttle forward, the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp roaring like a wounded animal. The Thunderbolt shuddered, then lunged into a diving turn. The airspeed needle climbed past 400. The controls stiffened. The canopy rattled. But the big machine held together. Through his gun sight, a gray-green shape filled the circle, an FW-190 rolling inverted to pursue another bomber. Johnson squeezed the trigger. 8 Browning and /M 2.50 caliber machine guns roared to life. The vibration was physical, a thunderous, percussive rhythm that made the entire aircraft tremble. Brass casings poured out in a golden stream as 100 rounds per second ripped through the sky. The German fighter disintegrated before Johnson's eyes. A flash, a puff of smoke, then nothing. He exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. "Holy hell," he muttered. That actually worked. For the first time, the Republic P-47 had spoken, and the sound was deafening. But back at Debden and Halesworth, many still doubted. The Thunderbolt was too heavy, too big, too complicated. It took almost 5 miles to climb to 25,000 feet. Its range barely allowed it to escort bombers to the French coast. Luftwaffe pilots mocked it in propaganda broadcasts, laughing at the American milk jug that couldn't catch a cow. They would not be laughing for long. The P-47's story began years earlier, in 1940, inside the crowded workshop of Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island. The company's chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian migrant who had fled both Bolshevik Russia and Nazi occupation, faced a daunting order from the U.S. Army Air Corps: design a high-altitude interceptor capable of escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. Kartveli's earlier designs, the P-35 and P-43 Lancer, had been nimble but underpowered. This new request demanded altitude, speed, and survivability. If it is to fly at 30,000 feet, he once told his engineers, it must have a turbo-supercharger and a strong belly to carry it. That strong belly would define the Thunderbolt's silhouette. Its fuselage was enormous, housing ducts, intercoolers, and a General Electric turbo-supercharger system that compressed air for the massive 18-cylinder double wasp engine. On paper, it promised 2,000 horsepower and over 420 miles per hour at altitude. In practice, it would weigh more than 5 tons. Test pilots joked that it taxied like a battleship when the first prototype, XP-47B, rolled out in May 1941. Mechanics needed wooden ladders to reach the cockpit. But once airborne, it was a revelation: stable, powerful, and astonishingly resilient. Still, in early 1943, few believed it could win a dogfight. Back over France, the 56th Fighter Group was finding out the hard way. That April, every Thunderbolt sortie seemed to end with questions, not victories. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109GS and FW-190, as could climb faster, turn sharper, and hit harder, at least at low and medium altitudes. Many American pilots, new to the European theater, felt overmatched. Captain Francis Gabby Gabreski later recalled, "The first months were rough. We were learning to fight Germans on their terms, in their skies, with an airplane nobody yet understood. Then, the pilots began to adapt. They discovered that the Thunderbolt, while sluggish in a climb, was nearly indestructible in a dive. The P-47 could reach terminal velocities that would rip the wings off a 109. If attacked, Thunderbolt pilots learned to roll inverted and dive using altitude as both sword and shield. Once the airspeed climbed above 450 miles per hour, no German plane could follow without tearing itself apart. The new motto spread quickly across the 8th Air Force: die for your life and live to fight another day. And when the P-47 did fight, its 8.50 caliber guns left no doubt. Each Browning machine gun carried 425 rounds. Together, that was 3,400 rounds of heavy ammunition, enough to sustain 30 seconds of continuous fire. Each bullet, weighing nearly 2 ounces, could shred aluminum skin, rupture coolant lines, and ignite fuel tanks. Against lightly armored fighters like the Bf-109, the results were catastrophic. Johnson would later write in his diary, "When those 850s opened up, the whole world seemed to shake. You didn't shoot an enemy airplane, you erased it." By summer 1943, the laughter in the Luftwaffe mess halls began to fade. German radio intercepts spoke of new heavy fighters operating from England, ones that dived like demons and withstood fire impossible to imagine. Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's famed general of fighters, later admitted in post-war interviews, "We underestimated the Thunderbolt. Its size deceived us. It was not a clumsy giant, it was a hammer. The hammer was just beginning to fall." July 30th, 1943. Above Saint-Omer, France. The sky was chaos, streaks of contrails twisting, crossing, and vanishing into the haze. Lieutenant Robert Johnson's Thunderbolt was in flames. A 20mm shell had exploded behind his seat, and hot oil streamed across his canopy like black rain. Smoke filled the cockpit. He could barely breathe. 2 FW-190s hung off his tail, closing fast. Johnson jammed the stick forward and dove. The altimeter spun wildly: 28,000, 25,000, 20,000 feet. His engine screamed at full throttle, a tortured metallic howl that rattled his teeth. The P-47's heavy frame shuddered but held together. The Germans followed, firing bursts that clanged against his fuselage like hammer blows on steel. He reached for the canopy release, it jammed. He was trapped inside a burning coffin. Then, instinct took over. He leveled out, pointed the Thunderbolt toward the English Channel, and prayed. His right hand gripped the trigger, the last line of defense. The pursuing Focke-Wulf lined up behind him. Johnson could see the muzzle flashes, orange flickers through the smoke. He pulled the trigger, sending a storm of .50 caliber rounds backward into the enemy's path. The tracers crossed the sky like molten wires. The German broke off. Johnson limped home to England with over 200 bullet holes in his aircraft. His canopy was shattered. His elevator cables were frayed. One tire was gone. But the P-47 refused to die. When he landed, ground crews stared in disbelief. "You should be gone down 10 minutes ago," one sergeant whispered. Johnson climbed out, black with soot and oil, and simply said, "The jug brought me home." That day marked a revelation. The P-47 Thunderbolt wasn't just powerful, it was indestructible. From that point onward, pilots trusted it with their lives. The Thunderbolt's radial engine, air-cooled and shielded by armor plating, could take hits that would cripple any inline engine like the one in the P-51 or Bf-109. Its cockpit was reinforced with bulletproof glass and steel. Its fuel tanks were self-sealing. Even when shot to pieces, the plane's sheer mass and design often brought its pilot home alive. Captain Walker Bud Mahurin, another ace of the 56th Fighter Group, put it bluntly: "You could shoot a Thunderbolt full of holes, and it would still bring you back to base. You couldn't say that about anything else in the sky." By the end of summer 1943, the Luftwaffe began noticing a change. American formations were no longer easy prey. The Thunderbolts had learned to fight on their own terms: fast, high, and brutal. The tactic was simple: boom and zoom. Dive from altitude, fire the 8.50s in a half-second burst, and climb back to the heavens before the Germans could react. The enemy couldn't chase, not without disintegrating in the thin air where the P-47 reigned supreme. The 8th Air Force, once bloodied by daylight bombing losses, suddenly had teeth. In the dark offices of the German Luftwaffe command in Paris, reports poured in. FW-190 squadrons along the French coast were suffering heavy losses. Pilots spoke of American fighters falling from the sun, of their cannon shells breaking against armor that would not yield. One German report noted bitterly, "Their firepower is monstrous. A single pass can annihilate an aircraft." Adolf Galland, reviewing the intelligence, finally acknowledged the problem. "The Thunderbolt's turbo-supercharger," he remarked, "gives it life where our engines gasped." He was referring to the Republic's secret weapon, the General Electric turbo-supercharger system mounted in the Thunderbolt's belly. At high altitude, where the air was thin and cold, German fighters struggled to maintain power. The Thunderbolt, however, used its supercharger to compress air, feeding the double Wasp engine a steady, powerful flow, allowing it to maintain over 400 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. Above 25,000 feet, it was untouchable. Meanwhile, in England, Major Hubert Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, was rewriting the playbook. A hard-edged leader with a pilot's intuition, Zemke understood the Thunderbolt's strengths better than anyone. He banned slow turns, enforced high-speed slashing attacks, and trained his men to fight in pairs. "Don't dogfight," he told them. "Hit hard, hit fast, and climb like hell." Zemke's wolves, as they became known, turned the sky into a hunting ground. By autumn 1943, their kill counts began to rival even the vaunted RAF Spitfire squadrons. The Luftwaffe started to feel pressure on two fronts: bombers by day, Thunderbolts by altitude. Still, Germany held an ace of its own. The Reich's defense network was tightening. Flak batteries, radar-guided fighters, and experienced aces made every mission a deadly gamble. But the Americans had something else: numbers. Every month, new P-47s arrived from Republic's factories. Farmingdale, Evansville, and Bridgeport churned them out by the hundreds. By the end of 1943, more than 5,000 Thunderbolts filled the skies of Europe and the Pacific. What had begun as an overweight failure was now the backbone of Allied air power. December 20th, 1943. The target, Bremen. Johnson's squadron escorted 500 bombers across a wall of flak and cloud. Near Oldenburg, they met resistance 20 Bf-109gs diving from the sun. But this time, it was different. Instead of panic, Johnson grinned. "All right, boys," he said into the radio. "Let us give them some thunder." The P-47s dropped from 28,000 feet like avalanches. The first burst of .50s shredded two Messerschmitts instantly. A third exploded into fragments. The Germans scattered, desperate to escape. In less than 3 minutes, the sky was clear. The Thunderbolt had found its rhythm and its reputation. German pilots began to whisper a new nickname over radio chatter: Der Riesen Buell, the Raging Bull. They'd soon learn what that really meant. February 20th, 1944. Over Leipzig, Germany, big week. The sky was alive with thunder. Waves of B-17s and B-24s droned eastward toward the heart of the Reich, escorted by hundreds of fighters, Thunderbolts among them. Below, black flak blooms erupted in steady rhythm. The air smelled of burning oil and cordite. This was Operation Argument Big Week, the all-out assault on German aircraft production. Captain Francis Gabby Gabreski's P-47D shuddered as he broke through the cloud cover. His oxygen mask hissed. On the horizon, dots appeared, a swarm of FW-190s, climbing hard from the east. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high," his wingman called out. Gabreski squinted, then smiled grimly. "Let us clean house." He rolled inverted and dove throttle to the stop. The Republic P-47D howled downward, the needle pushing past 480 miles per hour. Below him, the German formation widened in confusion. The Thunderbolts came in like meteors, each firing in short, controlled bursts. 8 streams of .50 caliber fire intersected the Luftwaffe formation. The results were devastating. An FW-190 disintegrated mid-turn. Another lost its wing in a flash of orange flame. The rest scattered, diving for the deck. But the Thunderbolts didn't pursue, they climbed back up, ready to strike again. The radio chatter was electric. Splash 1. 2 confirmed burning. They can't follow. They breaking apart. For the Luftwaffe, Big Week was a nightmare. Every factory, from Regensburg to Gotha, lay under relentless bombardment. Fighter units scrambled daily to intercept and met walls of P-47s and P-51s waiting for them. Between February 20th and 25th, Germany lost over 600 aircraft. The USAAF Air Force lost less than half, that, a staggering shift in air dominance. By the time the operation ended, Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland admitted to his staff, "The Americans have achieved what we feared most, air superiority. And it is the Thunderbolt that opens the door." But the P-47's reign was just beginning. As 1944 unfolded, the Thunderbolt evolved into something more than an escort fighter. Its rugged airframe and immense power made it perfect for a new, brutal role fighter bomber. The first Jabos, or Jag bomber missions, began in early spring. Fitted with bombs, rockets, and fuel tanks, P-47s roamed across northern France, Belgium, and the Low Countries, attacking railways, convoys, and flak positions. To German troops, the sound of the Thunderbolt's diving engine, a rising mechanical scream, became a psychological weapon. They called it Jabo fever, a mix of dread and panic whenever that distinctive roar filled the air. A German infantryman near Cannes later wrote in his diary, "When the big American fighters came, you could feel the ground tremble. The sound made your stomach twist. We ran for the ditches before they even appeared." By June 1944, as the Allies prepared for Operation Overlord, the P-47 had matured into a monster of war. The new P-47D-25 model featured a bubble canopy for greater visibility and, most crucially, the revolutionary paddle blade propeller. This upgrade transformed the aircraft's performance. Where earlier Thunderbolts struggled to climb, the new propeller allowed it to surge upward with startling speed. The Luftwaffe was stunned. German pilots who had once mocked the flying milk bottle now faced a beast that could outdive, outshoot, and nearly outclimb them. During one test engagement, a P-47D-25 climbed from 10,000 to 20,000 feet in just over 4 minutes, a feat unthinkable the year before. Now, Zemke told his men, "We fight them at their level and we win." June 7th, 1944 D+1, Normandy. The beaches still smoked. Allied convoys rolled through hedgerows toward Cannes. Overhead, flights of Thunderbolts swept low across the fields, wings bristling with 500-pound bombs. Captain Walker Mahurin led his flight over the French countryside, scanning for movement. Below, a German column snaked along a road, trucks, half-tracks, fuel carriers. Mahurin keyed the radio. "Target in sight. Go low and hit hard." The P-47s dove from 8,000 feet. Their roar was deafening, echoing through the hills. Bombs dropped in perfect sequence, tearing the convoy apart in a series of orange-white explosions. Then came the guns' 3,400 rounds of .50 caliber Fury unleashed at treetop level. The air filled with dust and shrapnel. When it was over, the road burned for a mile. The Thunderbolt had become more than an air superiority fighter. It was now a flying artillery piece, the scourge of German armor, the bane of railways, the destroyer of columns. Its heavy frame, once criticized, now made it the perfect weapon for low-level attack runs that would rip lesser aircraft apart. In the coming months, P-47 groups followed the Allied advance across Europe, from Normandy's bocage to the Ardennes forests, from Belgium to the Rhine. Everywhere they went, destruction followed. Rail lines disappeared. Convoys burned. Tanks smoldered. German morale collapsed. And when the Luftwaffe tried to strike back, they found their skies already claimed by the same milk bottle they had once laughed at. By August 1944, Thunderbolts had destroyed over 1,500 enemy aircraft in the air and thousands more on the ground. The message was clear: America's industrial machine had turned derision into dominance. But the bloodiest winter was yet to come. December 17th, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The sky was iron gray, heavy with snow. Below, the forests of the Ardennes burned. The German army had launched its last desperate offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. Caught by surprise, American ground forces fought tooth and nail in freezing conditions. For the first few days, bad weather kept the Allied air forces grounded. The Luftwaffe, battered but not dead, saw a flicker of opportunity. Then, on December 23rd, the clouds broke. Sunlight pierced the haze, revealing the frozen landscape below and hundreds of Thunderbolts waiting to strike. Major Dave Schilling, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, stood on the tarmac at Bokstad Airfield as his men prepared to take off. Frost crackled beneath their boots. The engines of dozens of P-47DS roared to life, their propellers slicing the cold air into blurs of light. Schilling shouted into his radio headset, "Gentlemen, the weather is ours. Let us go hunting." Moments later, the Thunderbolts lifted off, climbing through the last layers of fog toward the embattled Ardennes. By midday, the sky over Bastogne belonged to the Jug. Flights of P-47s prowled the battlefield, attacking everything that moved: trucks, tanks, trains, bridges. German armor, once confident under the cloud cover, was caught in the open. From above, the Thunderbolts descended in screaming dives, their .50 caliber guns lighting up the snow-covered fields like lightning. One pilot from the 362nd Fighter Group described the scene. "You could see the tanks trying to scatter, but it was too late. The air was full of tracers, red and white lines tearing through the smoke. We didn't just strafe them. We erased them." The Germans learned to fear that sound, the deep, throaty growl of the R-2800 engine, followed by the ripping roar of machine guns. Soldiers dove into ditches at the mere whisper of engines overhead. They called the Thunderbolt's arrival the Hammer of God. By the end of the week, the P-47s had destroyed over 500 vehicles and dozens of bridges critical to the German advance. Bastogne held. The Luftwaffe, attempting to cover the retreat, found itself ambushed again and again. December 27, 1944. Near St. Vith, a flight of Thunderbolts from the 365th Fighter Group encountered a mixed formation of Bf-109GS and FW-190 as attempting to strafe Allied armor. The air battle that followed would become legend. Captain William Dixie Sloan led the first pass, diving from 22,000 feet. The .50s opened fire, a wall of bullets so dense it seemed to slice the sky itself. A Messerschmitt burst into flames, another spiraled down, trailing smoke. Within minutes, 5 German fighters were destroyed. Not a single Thunderbolt was lost. The after-action report read simply, "Engagement lasted 4 minutes. Enemy formation annihilated." By then, the Luftwaffe's strength was broken. Many of its pilots were young, barely trained, and terrified. Against them stood veterans who had survived a year of brutal aerial war, men like Gabreski, Johnson, and Zemke, now masters of the sky and their machine. Even when faced with the new jet-powered Me-262, the Thunderbolt held its own. Pilots learned to climb high, wait above the airfields, and strike as the jets took off or landed. In one instance, P-47s destroyed 7 Me-262s on the ground near Rhein, a clear message that Germany could no longer hide behind technology. January 1945, the Rhine. The Allied juggernaut was rolling east, and the Thunderbolt followed every step. Bridges, trains, and fuel depots vanished under its bombs. Luftwaffe resistance was sporadic, desperate, often suicidal. At low altitude, the Thunderbolt's brutality was unmatched. Each of its 8 Browning machine guns could fire 13 rounds per second. When all 8 opened up together, they created what pilots called a wall of lead. Lieutenant Raymond Knight, flying with the 350th Fighter Group in Italy, once destroyed 14 enemy aircraft on the ground in a single day. For his final mission, flying a heavily damaged Thunderbolt that could barely climb, he attacked a German airfield alone, silencing 2 more aircraft before crashing on the return leg. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His commander said afterward, "Ray didn't fly a plane that day, he flew a fortress." By the end of the winter campaign, the statistics told the story. Thunderbolts had flown over 1.3 million sorties, dropped more than 130,000 tons of bombs, and fired hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition. They had destroyed 3,752 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, more than any other American fighter in the European theater. But numbers alone couldn't explain what the Germans had come to understand in their bones, that the Thunderbolt represented not just an aircraft, but the industrial and psychological might of the United States. One Luftwaffe ace, interviewed after the war, said quietly, "When we first saw them, we laughed. They were huge, slow, we thought. But then they came down from the clouds, and we realized what they were. They were flying tanks. And they never stopped coming. Another German pilot described it more bitterly. The Thunderbolt was like a nightmare you couldn't wake from. Every time you thought you had it beaten, it came back faster, louder, angrier. By the spring of 1945, the nightmare was complete. April 16, 1945, Magdeburg, Germany. The war was ending, but the sky still burned. Captain Bud Mahirin's Thunderbolt streaked across the Elbe River at treetop height, the roar of its engine echoing over the shattered remains of German bridges. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of cordite. Ahead, a convoy of Wehrmacht trucks snaked along a dirt road, retreating east toward Berlin. Mahirin checked his mirrors, dipped his wings, and keyed the mic. "All right, boys, last danced." The P-47s came in low and fast. Bombs fell, rockets screamed, and machine guns hammered the convoy to dust. Within seconds, the road was nothing but flame and wreckage. From above, it looked like hell itself had opened. As the Thunderbolts climbed away, Mahirin's voice crackled again, almost somber. "That's enough. Let them have their surrender." By mid-April, the Luftwaffe no longer existed as an organized force. What remained of its aircraft were grounded for lack of fuel or destroyed on the runways. The Thunderbolts roamed freely over Germany, attacking targets of opportunity trains, depots, and bridges to hasten the collapse. But victory had come at a cost. Of the thousands of Thunderbolts that had crossed the Channel since 1943, many never returned. Pilots like Johnson, Gabreski, and Zemke had survived, but hundreds of others were gone, their names carved into stone at Cambridge, Mattingly, and Ardennes cemeteries. Still, for those who lived, the P-47 was more than a machine. It was a comrade. Robert S. Johnson, who had once returned with over 200 bullet holes in his plane, later said, "You didn't fly the jug. You wore it. It was part of you. It took care of you like nothing else in this world. And it wasn't just sentiment." Engineers later calculated that a Thunderbolt could absorb nearly half a ton of damage, more than double what a Spitfire or Mustang could withstand, and still fly home. Its thick skin and massive radial engine made it nearly invincible in combat. For American pilots, it was a symbol of survival. As Allied troops pushed deeper into Germany, Thunderbolt squadrons began shifting to new duties: ground patrol, close support, and even humanitarian drops. They strafed enemy positions one day and guided lost convoys the next. At one captured Luftwaffe base near Kassel, Zemke himself landed among the smoldering wrecks of German fighters, FW-190s, Bf-109s, Me-262 jets, all destroyed by the very Thunderbolts that now circled overhead. He climbed down from his cockpit, walked across the wreckage-strewn tarmac, and turned to his men. "This," he said quietly, "is what air superiority looks like." The statistics that followed were staggering. 15,683 Thunderbolts built, the most of any U.S. fighter during the war. Over 546,000 sorties flown in Europe alone. 160,000 ground targets destroyed, including 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and nearly 70,000 trucks. 3,752 confirmed air-to-air kills. It was a machine forged by industry, refined by fire, and proven in blood. No longer a joke, the Thunderbolt had become the sledgehammer of Allied victory. Even the Germans admitted it. In a 1945 interrogation report, a former Luftwaffe officer said, "We feared the P-47 more than the Mustang. The Mustang chased us, but the Thunderbolt destroyed everything we stood on." When the guns finally fell silent on May 8, 1945 V-Day, the Thunderbolts were still flying. Over the ruins of Berlin, flights of jugs circled in formation, gleaming silver against a sky that had seen too much death. The pilots looked down at a continent in ashes and knew they had helped end the storm. In England, hangars fell quiet. Mechanics leaned on toolboxes. Pilots packed their duffels. But as they left their planes, many turned back for one last look at the broad, powerful wings, the scuffed olive-drab paint, the blackened gun barrels. It wasn't beauty they saw, but strength. The kind that wins wars. In the years after the war, the P-47's legend grew. It served in Korea, in the air forces of France, Brazil, and Mexico. Wherever it flew, it carried the same reputation: indestructible, unstoppable, unmistakable. When asked years later what made the Thunderbolt so special, General Hubert Zemke paused and said simply, "It was America, built in metal. Big, loud, and impossible to kill." From joke to nightmare, from the flying milk bottle to the raging bull of the skies, the P-47 Thunderbolt had silenced every critic. What began as laughter in 1943 ended in awe by 1945. In the end, it wasn't his speed or grace that won the air war over Europe. It was power, endurance, and fire. 8.50 caliber machine guns roaring from a sky the enemy would never control again. That roar was the sound of victory.